Thanks everybody for joining. I'm Glenn Solomon. I'm managing partner at GGV Capital, and we're a multi-stage venture capital firm. We've been in business for 20 years, and we manage about $6 billion in capital. Really delighted to welcome you to the Hiring and Onboarding in a Virtual World webinar masterclass we're holding today. We have an incredible group of speakers and who are really experts on this topic, and we're going to have some fun talking about this topic, and we have a great group of folks listening in as well. So just first, a couple words about the folks who are participating. Kate Caulfield is the VP of Talent Acquisition at HashiCorp. Amazingly, she's been at HashiCorp, Kate, about a year now. And I think has hired about half the employees at HashiCorp. So 400 or 500 employees have been hired under Kate's watch. So she's had a busy last year for sure. And prior to her experience at HashiCorp, she had a very long tenure in a similar roles at Salesforce. We got Jen Holmstrom. Jen runs talent at GGV. And she works closely with our portfolio companies and portfolio company leaders on hiring, training, managing, retaining great teams. So this is kind of what Jen does day in, day out. And lastly, we have Mike Fitzsimmons with us. Mike's the founder and CEO of Crosschq, which is a GGV portfolio company that we're very proud of. And Mike's bringing, Crosschq is bringing human intelligence hiring to the market. So we're looking forward to learning a little bit more about that. I get to ask the questions of this great group. If anybody listening in has questions as well, please feel free to add them to the Q&A in the Zoom chat, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. So given that most people are working remotely in the current environment, I wanted to start with you, Kate, because you've had experience with remote. HashiCorp is a distributed company and has been since day one. So in some ways, the pandemic really for you guys hasn't changed things too much. But as I mentioned before, you came from Salesforce prior to HashiCorp, which was obviously a more traditional in-office type environment. So I'm curious, maybe first, just can you contrast a little bit what it's like hiring in a remote environment versus traditional environment? What are some of the differences in the process when you're hiring folks into one or the other? And maybe you could talk a little bit about the candidates as well, types of candidates who you look for and who kind of tend to gravitate towards each of those.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, first off, thanks so much for having me, and really excited. This topic is near and dear to our heart here at HashiCorp, given that we're about 85–90% distributed. So to Glenn's comment, things haven't changed too much on our end, except for that kind of 10–15% that are traditionally in our office in San Francisco. And so when we think about, hiring, luckily we didn't have to pivot too much. But when I did join, that was actually one of the selling points for joining HashiCorp. Is really excited. I was really excited about tackling that opportunity. And it was a new opportunity for me to really explore different types of talent in the market, and not being constricted to an office location was really exciting. And when we think about our engineering org specifically, we are what we call strategically distributed. So, we're not hiring in every country in the world. We're very focused on hiring in a specific subset of 14 countries currently. But engineering is really focused on, about 5 or 6 of those, because we really want to make sure that time zones align, and different teams are really focused on making sure they have that collaboration still and are able to have that contact. And so that's really opened up the opportunities for us to hire, the engineer who sits in Bozeman, Montana, right? That some of our competitors weren't able to hire. Now, but with the pandemic and, a lot of companies now being open to hiring remotely, we're seeing that we don't have that competitive edge as much as maybe we did before the pandemic. So, really having to focus in on our employer brand and really focusing on, that value prop that honestly, we've never built out. And so we're in the process of building out and really telling that story for our candidates and coming up with really specific playbooks. So it's been really fun to tap into talent that I've never been able to explore historically. But one thing that we do have to be really careful about is there are employees that don't want to work remotely, right? And aren't successful working in remote environments. And we've seen that. We've seen people attrit, a small amount, but we've seen a few here and there that have attrited after 3 months or so. So I can't handle the work from home 100% of the time. And so we have to really vet that out at the beginning of the process and really make sure that they're truly comfortable. Either they've had experience with it in the past, or if they haven't, really making sure that they're comfortable with being remote 100% of the time.
How do you try to screen for that?
Yeah, so it's really, asking some behavioral based questions about, tell me about a time when you did have to work remotely and what were some of the challenges you had? What did you like about it? And if they haven't, it's really kind of digging into what are your concerns? What are the benefits you see, and just really digging into that for the entire process from, initial screen all the way to before we make an offer, just reiterating, just a reminder, this is 100% remote. You sure you're okay with that? So, just really, really making sure that we're honing in on that.
Got it. Jen, and by the way, it seems like we're either sitting in exactly the same location or we have the same virtual background. It sounds like Kate's interestingly actually saying that in some cases, maybe the pandemic has removed a competitive advantage that HashiCorp had in hiring people, kind of counterintuitive in some ways. But what have you seen across the GGV portfolio? Has hiring gotten easier as a result of the pandemic for companies that are hiring, or is it still as hard as it's always been? What do you think and maybe go into detail, are there some job functions that are harder than others? And curious what you're seeing in our portfolio.
Absolutely. So I think hiring is always hard. Assessing people and convincing them to jump on board is a tricky practice. So I'm not sure that it's gotten any easier or harder. I think it's actually just gotten really different for most companies. I think Hashi is a bit of an exception in terms of having had a mostly distributed workforce. So this is a whole new paradigm. There's a paradigm shift for most of the companies in the portfolio in terms of how they hire. And I think there's been a bit of an evolution in terms of companies getting comfortable with hiring great folks, but not meeting them in person. So there's a lot that we see, and nobody knows how long this is our new normal. Nobody knows how long this is going to last, and whether we're going to be able to go back to meeting people in person. So companies that I work with are certainly thinking about how to adjust to the current environment and getting everybody, CEOs, founders, and all the hiring managers, getting them comfortable with being able to actually make a call on somebody remotely over Zoom. So there's that. And then there's also, how do you close somebody over Zoom? How do you get the candidate? The candidate is the other side of the table. How did they get comfortable with you as a company and in a Zoom world where, or a remote environment? So I think there's a couple sides of it, but I would say that not easier, not harder, hard, but different is the big thing I would underscore there.
Yeah, I definitely want to get into sort of on both sides of this, both the vetting side when you're completely virtual and the closing side. But it is heartening to hear. It sounds like that, lots of our portfolio companies, which is probably representative of other startups more broadly, are hiring still. Would you say that's the case?
Yeah.
And, anything you could say pattern wise, you want to mention, the site we just put up, the GGV job board and why we did that and what that means for people.
Absolutely. So happy to say that most of the portfolio companies are absolutely hiring. We went through a period there where, hiring was kind of frozen it wasn't that long a period. I think companies were just stepping back to assess Where are we? What does this mean? And what does our hiring plan look like? Since then, I would argue that was probably 2 months ago. Since then, 2.5 months ago, it feels like we're really right back in the swing of things in our new normal, where initially hiring plans, if they were initially frozen, they then went to kind of the critical roles. So everybody, I think, took a look at their hiring plan, did some assessment kind of against revenue plans to try to figure out where they were, whether it all made sense in this new world. And then, but it feels to me like there's a lot of momentum out there. And to that end, we just actually launched the GGV Jobs Board, where we scrape the careers pages from the portfolio companies. So, and we will make that available. We'll post it here, so everybody on the call can see it. But we did that to aggregate the different jobs that are out there and to try to create more visibility, because there are some great jobs. Companies are looking for for talent. Always room for great talent, and there is momentum out there.
Cool. So Mike, turning it to you, like, you've got tons of customers at Crosschq now, and I'm curious what you're seeing. Obviously, maybe you could say a few words about what the company does, but I'm particularly curious what's going on with passive candidates, where you guys tend to shine, and what the kind of mood is generally amongst folks who, pre-pandemic were kind of in a liquid sort of passive candidate market.
Yeah, yeah, and just to start, I was so psyched to have this conversation, because I think, like all of us, there's so many mixed signals right now, and trying to determine whether something is a signal or something greater than that, right? It's just your head is swirling. So with that said, I mean, just and to give you a little context on Crosschq, and it kind of segues with one of the things that Kate said. So the whole Crosschq platform is built on this idea of human intelligence, and it's gathering feedback and insights from both job seekers and the people that know job seekers well to determine if they're a great match for a job. So that's what we do. But one of the things that Kate said about understanding how well suited a candidate is for remote work, just a fascinating little data point from the Crosschq data. It's a question we asked when all of this started. We have clients that said, gosh, can you add a module to the whole survey process that helps us vet that? And the data that came back is, 9.5 out of 10 candidates said, yep, I'm great, I'm going to be awesome. The percentage of the people that know them well was far less supportive of that candidate being successful in a remote work environment. So there is still a lot to unpack on that, and just get smarter around how we better assess, because guess what? We're not all going to do just as well in an office as we're going to do out of an office. It just is what it is. Right?
So from what you've seen so far, people self-assess that they'll do better remotely than maybe they really will?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
100%.
So that puts pressure on anybody hiring to really figure out how to vet this better.
Just get smart about it and push it, So that said, so back to your question, just in terms of a little bit of what, following on with Jen's comments, where we've seen the same thing at a macro level, just from hiring volumes. For us, we as companies are hiring their candidates to come through the Crosschq system. So we've got a good proxy for some general trends. About half of our customers are high growth sort of tech companies, just to give you a sense. We dipped as low as probably 45% negative comp in terms of candidate activity, probably week 4 after shelter in place in the Bay Area. Last week, we were plus 20 comp, just to give you a sense. And so we had customers, and it was so abrupt that initially had hiring plans. We're hiring 1,000 people this year, to 2 weeks in, like, hey, we're going to only hire 100, to 2 weeks later saying we're laying off 400. Like that, those are real stories that were happening in our portfolio. So happy to see that those companies are rehiring now, and there seems to be a good momentum. Your question around the passive candidate piece, and just another part of our platform, is that we encourage the community of the talent that we reach out to get feedback. We also sort of convert them into job candidates for our portfolio of customers. And what's been fascinating to see for sort of knowledge workers, tech knowledge workers, the opt-in rates have been pretty constant. So it hasn't moved one way or the other. For us, that average is about 2 in 5 of the folks that sort of give references on candidates opt into our talent pool. But where it has dropped off precipitously is on more of the labor, sort of the general labor pool. That number, for the first time in our history, dipped down to the high teens. We've never seen any company below 20. So there's something happening with, I think, all of the the stimulus packages and the incentives we have, and all of that segment, at least what we're experiencing, that cohort of job seekers is not necessarily as aggressively seeking new opportunities yet. But for the knowledge tech worker, it's been pretty constant.
Okay, but generally speaking, then is it fair to say that more, people are less open to, taking a new job if they currently are employed somewhere, from what you see in the data?
Yeah, I don't know that we're totally qualified to make that read, because in a passive candidate sense, they're taking the call, whether they leave, or Kate has a better perspective on whether they're taking the job or not, right? But they're still taking as many calls as they were taking before. The cohort that's not taking the calls is that other segment of the talent population.
Okay. This suggests we need to talk about the closing process. But Jen, maybe, when you look across our startups, do you think candidates, is there any change in the tenor from candidates, like where they're coming from? Are they, are the folks applying to the jobs on our new jobs board, are they coming from other startups? Are people going from big tech into startup companies these days, or is it kind of flight to quality or, safety, if you will, in the current environment?
I think two things. I think this kind of the usual startup environment, there's always going to be movement amongst this, startup companies. So I think that's still happening. One thing that I think in what this environment has probably prompted is people's risk profile. So if they're feeling like, it's safer or less risky to stay at big tech, or to apply to big tech, I definitely think there's a bit of a trend that way. But I would argue even pre-COVID, competing for, a Google, Facebook, Airbnb versus really early stage company, those two candidates, it's almost looking at those are really different things to kind of look at big tech versus early stage. So I spent a little bit of time at Facebook before, and we always used to say that's not the right candidate necessarily if that's your competition. But that said, I would suspect that certain candidates are going to flight to not necessarily quality, but stability. But I still think candidates come from everywhere for the stage.
So obviously, closing, once you make an offer, you go through the process, you find the right candidate, you become, you go through the entire process internally and become convinced that they'd be a good addition. It's pretty painful to then have them not take the job, either stay where they are or go somewhere else. What are you seeing as sort of state of the art? And, any sort of anecdotes or things from our portfolio where companies are good at closing, what they're doing?
Yeah. So I would argue the best closers, I think some of the principles that held true pre-COVID or still hold true in a remote world. And that's closing begins at the very first point of interaction. So helping the recruiting teams and the hiring managers, the hiring teams, appreciate the benefit of selling and not only assessing candidates as they come through process, but also really selling along the way. I think that's arguably even more important when you're unable to do it in person, but really kind of getting that candidate excited at every step of the process and making sure, and this speaks to the candidate experience as well. I think closing begins with the candidate experience. So how are you presenting with, what is the interaction with your company? What is that candidate experiencing? And just assuming, it's funny, I was speaking to a couple companies yesterday, and they are both competing for these senior level people they have 4 or 5 offers. So, there's definitely a lot going on in the market. So the better you are at knowing that bringing them along and selling the whole way across, I think it's really, really important. In terms of getting creative, companies I heard one of our companies is having doing these virtual dinners. I mean, not suggesting this is necessarily necessary in every case, but they have dinner on Zoom and they share a meal together. I mean, there's some interesting new creative things going on out there, but I would encourage all companies and hiring managers, get really creative and get personal. People are send candidates a plan, pay attention to what they tell you along the way about them and what matters to them and what they're concerned about. because those set of concerns are arguably potentially different now. So really paying attention and getting into a closing selling motion is pretty important, I think.
Yeah, candidate experience in 2 dimensions on Zoom is probably pretty hard to differentiate on, but I like the idea of sort of adding a real world component, like,
Yeah.
you know, it might feel a little contrived, but doing a dinner together, sending a plant, better be a nice plan.
That's right. Yeah, getting creative, I think, and also listening to the candidate. That's pretty important.
Got it. So Kate, you talked about your employer brand. You mentioned the concept of employer brand and having to build on that and the value prop. Would you say, you know, from what you've seen at Hashi, is like the pandemic making closing harder? It sounds like it might be, or you know, anything you could say on what it's like to close in a distributed, virtual, or remote type environment that was maybe different from Salesforce, I think would be really interesting.
Yeah, I think one thing we've seen just looking at our offer decline data is, you know, we hover right around that like 12% offer decline. So, you know, really proud of that number.
That's good. Yeah.
You know, what we've seen is the reason for people declining is shifting. So just to give you perspective, all of last year, so our, you know, FY20, we had 1 person decline an offer because they were staying at their current company. In Q1 alone, we had 10. So that's telling us that, you know, people are, you know, I think Mike mentioned the risk profile, right? You know, people are much more adverse to making a change now. And so, you know, we've really been talking, my recruiting leadership team, we've been talking about, you know, what kind of closing training can we implement for our recruiters? And one thing we did at Salesforce that was amazing is we actually trained our sourcers on Sandler training, which is a sales methodology. So we're talking about implementing some sort of kind of sales training for our recruiters here to really understand, you know, it's kind of that value-based selling, like how do you truly get to understand what the motivators are for the candidates? And Jen, you touched on this, and you have to talk about those throughout the entire process of reminding them why they even took the call in the first place, right? And really making sure that that's still the true motivator for somebody to make a change, so that we don't get in this position of getting to the 11th hour with another 10 candidates in Q2 that end up just, you know, staying. So that's one thing that we're looking to kind of tweak. And you know, we're also seeing more and more competing offers with bigger companies, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, piggybacking off of what Jen said related to, you know, generally we see candidates focus on smaller companies, or they're more inclined to focus on bigger companies, and they kind of have that idea of where they want to go. But now we're seeing that they're talking to both, right? And so, you know, that really, again, ties back into like our focus on the employer brand and our value prop and what's our differentiator and, you know, all of those pieces. So those are a couple things that we've kind of noticed. And so, you know, trying to stay in front of that with our recruiters and just enabling them to make sure that they can have those conversations.
It's interesting though. It sounds like your experience is the market, at least for the roles you're looking to fill, is still pretty tight. Even though we hear about unemployment shooting up. Can you know, I know you're hiring in different regions. Are you seeing that kind of across the board, or are there geos that seem, you know, better for you? And maybe a word or two about like what's happening, any comp trends you're seeing that you think are worth noting as a result.
Yeah, so, you know, we're seeing, so for engineering specifically, you know, Bay Area is always, we honestly try to stay away from the Bay Area for hiring our engineers. And we're still finding, you know, when we do come across a candidate, you know, in the Valley, I mean, it's as cutthroat as it's ever been. So that's kind of reiterating our strategy of staying away from the Bay Area because we can. Right. And so, you know, I think for the folks that are, you know, truly remote, you know, in very remote locations, I think we have less competition. So again, really trying to push that that strategy. I think about global regions, it's everywhere. We're seeing the same trends, across APJ and EMEA as well. So yeah, it's the war for talent is still real, and we've been kind of testing our comp ranges a little bit and seeing, can we use this to our advantage a little bit and really, stay true to our, midpoint and below. And we've been testing that. No, we're still having to pay for that top talent, and so, that was our hypothesis, but it was, it's been interesting to test that, and that top talent is you're still gonna have to pay for it. So, yeah, we haven't really seen those trends in pay, not in the tech world, at least. I'm sure in other areas, but yeah.
All right. You're making me feel better about being such a nudge to my daughters to get into STEM.
Yeah, exactly.
Sounds like that's the place to be.
Oh yeah. 6-year-olds doing all the coding academies, and yeah, I have to.
Great. Mike, you mentioned that you're seeing like this trend internally at some of your customers regarding like the overhire and the pros and cons of that. So maybe just talk about what you mean by that, and contrast what you're seeing to what Kate has been saying about her life trying to recruit into Hashi.
Yeah, this also goes in the bucket of there's so many signals, you're like, your head spins, right? You're like, I don't know. But one thing just to shout out too, her offer decline rate is phenomenal, right? We have customers that are north of 50%, good growth tech companies in the Bay Area. So that's awesome to hear. They're obviously doing something pretty right. But just to amplify this, we have one gig customer who's talking to us about just the profile of driver applicants. Like they have dentists that are now driving, right? That dentist is not going to be driving once shelter in place is done and they're back to working their day-to-day job, right? Just to like amplify it at that level. So that said,
I went to my dentist yesterday. It was my biggest outing in the last 4 months. I got my teeth cleaned.
I'm guessing they're not driving anymore. Exactly. So that as a kind of a backdrop, just to simplify it, but that is happening too, just because, and we have just many TA heads that are like, have been through this before in other challenging markets. And it's just an increased sensitivity to the risk of the overhire. And so to some extent, as you are getting, we're pursuing more qualified talent in the stars, and maybe they're not going to last. And so we have actually seen a conscious shift in strategy in some cases where it's like, look, I'm not gonna chase necessarily the A player. It's hard to admit it and frankly even say it out loud, but from a real strategy perspective, it's real, and we're seeing it happen across our portfolio to sort of combat it. So because there's some really good probably next level talent that maybe would have been overlooked, and take a chance and see where that gets you.
Anything you're seeing, across your company, your customer base in terms of compensation, and that war for talent, close rates or offers, that kind of thing? Yeah,
the things that we just the offset on these is we track just as candidates come through our system, whether they get hired at the company or not. So we're seeing more candidates are higher rate, but we're seeing more candidates come through because people are using it further upper funnel. So they're weeding out the folks that they didn't think they had a good shot to hire earlier in the process. So it's again, a tale of kind of two cities. I'm not really sure I got a good conclusion on it. Comp seems to be really constant, right? It seems to be really constant. One thing for sure for folks that are looking for relocation. So we have a Fortune 150 customer who's trying to hire 2,000 people, but they need them to all be on site in Denver as an example. And that's tough. That's really, really challenging right now. Right. So that's, I will tell you that and they are not yet prepared to change their strategy to make that a remote opportunity. They don't see that. So I think there's some nuance in there that is fairly complicated as well.
I don't know if there's a way to answer this question from the data, but do you think this is like the start of a bigger trend? Or do you think, hey, once there's a good inoculation or vaccine for, COVID-19, everyone, people are going to return and say, yeah, I'll take that job and I'll go into the office in Denver? Or do you think we've got a new normal?
I love, we have one of our advisors, Rusty Roof, and he gave me a quote like on week 2 of this thing. And he said, what started as a workaround became the way we worked. And he's just one of those guys that stuff like that just rolls off and you just want to eat it up. But I believe a big part of that, another one of our companies, for example, is reopening their office mid-July, 150 person office in the Bay Area. Went out to their customer base their employee base, say who's optional, who's coming back, right? And 10% said they'd come back. Half of those said they'd only come back if their whole team was coming back. So you had 5% saying, I'm in to come back. I'm like, I think we're in for an awfully interesting challenge here when this thing reopens, for sure. I have no real data to give you a read on how I think it actually will end up.
Okay, Jen. So here's what I'm hearing right now. This is going to be a challenge for our portfolio companies because humans misassess themselves. So they think they can work in a remote environment, but they really can't. They don't tend to do so well. 1, 2, they want to work remotely, and 3, it sounds like a lot of companies are basically going to say, yeah, like we're okay with this longer term. And so if you want to build, you want to have a good close rate, you want to build a good brand, it probably is going to have to reflect a lot of flexibility going forward. Do you think I have that right? And I don't know, how does this change the way we start advising our companies on their talent strategies?
Yeah, I think you definitely have it right. And I truly believe this is where having good, strong managers and providing manager training, because you're the managers within the people managers within the organization are your amplifiers for good or for bad. So really helping managers figure out how to manage teams in this remote environment is of critical importance, especially, I would assume, I know HashiCorp does a great job with this in a distributed environment, but if a company is shifting to now, if people who are maybe new managers or managing big teams, complex teams across the world for the first time, now having to do it over a Zoom, it adds a layer of complexity that wasn't there before, or it certainly amplifies what was there before. So having good, strong manager training, I truly believe is of critical importance, so that not only when hiring great talent is one thing, retaining, developing, and growing that talent is another, all of which is really important and has changed a little bit in this world.
Mm-hmm. Sure has. Okay, I want to shift gears a little bit. One topic that we all had a chance to discuss prior, and is clearly of huge importance to all of you, and very heartening to see how important it is becoming across tech and Silicon Valley, is diversity, equity, inclusion, DE&I. And Kate, let me start with you. This is an issue you guys have been focused on for a while at HashiCorp. And you were just mentioning before we started that you're having, some really good success in this regard. Maybe, can you talk a little bit about what it means to make it a focus when you're recruiting talent, and sort of things you need to do to bring into your process to ensure that you guys hit your goals?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and this is something, since my way back in my college days, my mom is a woman CEO. So it's like, I've always been very passionate about this topic. And, I was very fortunate at Salesforce to have amazing support from, the leadership there. And, coming to HashiCorp, one of my first hires was our head of D&I, Colleen. And, I think it was a really big statement that at that time when we were 600, 700 employees, that we actually hired a head of D&I, which I think was really ahead of the curve for a company of our size. And have to give a shout out to Armon and Dave for really pushing that initiative. And so it's been really fun to work with her and just, think of things outside of the box that we can be doing, and really starting to, talk about our strategy. But one thing that's just really, really fascinating, and it sounds so basic, is just talking about it. So as an example, our engineering leader, Preeti, she, when she came on board, it was top of mind for her in every all hands and with her leadership. And when I came on board, that was, one of the biggest things that we talked about during my interview process is, how do we continue to drive that focus and be more intentional about it? And so a couple of things that we've implemented with her specifically is, and actually across the board, is really looking at our data. And when we look at our funnels and, really we're looking at those every single quarter to make sure that there isn't any bias in the process. But one thing, and I'm happy to say that we are within 2 to 3% at every stage of the process when we look at the breakdown of men and women. So our processes that we've implemented that are really focused on hiring for attributes and behavioral-based interviewing, they're working, right? So that's kind of the first step, is taking out as much of that bias as possible. But what we realized is our applicant pool was not diverse at all. And so, what that told us was, when we are focused on going out and doing our proactive sourcing, that's where we can really influence the pipeline. And so since we've been doing that, we have consistently hired at 35% women for engineering. And our goal is actually to hire at 50% women for our engineering leadership roles. And we've hit that target. So it's just the intentionality of it and keeping it top of mind. It's amazing to see the shift. And since Brandon Sweeney came on board, our CRO, it's been a huge focus, and we're developing a strategy for him and his org. But just since he joined, and it's really been top of mind at every all hands, every leadership meeting, we've increased the representation across all URGs by 75%. And that's just literally, we've done nothing except talk about it. So
wow.
Again, it seems so basic, but it's just keeping it top of mind. And so when your hiring managers and your recruiters are putting together their panels and bringing candidates to the table, they're constantly asking themselves that question, right? And that's exactly what you want. So I think it's, just to kind of recap, I think it's really making sure that, your processes are as consistent as possible, and then the intentionality of it. And I think, also, when we start to think about university hiring, we're not there yet. We don't have a university hiring program, but because of our distributed nature, we have a really unique opportunity to focus on non-traditional universities. So and now, this is going to spike even more, but there's a ton of, fully remote universities and coding academies and, these really kind of specialized universities. And that's going to be our strategy. Like, we won't even go to MIT. We probably won't even go to Stanford, right? So that's going to be a huge piece of our diversity strategy going forward as well.
Mm-hmm. So for you guys, having a remote culture, you can really recruit from anywhere. I know you said you have certain countries, but even within the US, like, geography is not a constraint. That has to be helpful as you think about filling the funnel up top with underrepresented groups. What about for companies that are biting the bullet now and saying, yeah, I'm going to have at least part of my workforce now that is going to kind of work this way for a long time? Should they be thinking the same thing?
For sure. And we, when I first started, Preeti and I were having this conversation of, do we start to go hire engineers in Germany and have that kind of be a focus? And we were looking at it from a diversity lens. So, like, my advice is, if you have access to LinkedIn Talent Insights or any other kind of insights tool that will give you the diversity data within a specific region, that's been extremely helpful, because her, our assumption was maybe, hey, maybe the diversification of the pool is different outside of the US. So we were testing all of these theories of, are there specific countries that we should go into because the pool is more diverse? And it turned out it wasn't. But using that data to really drive kind of your hiring strategy from a diversity perspective is really, really interesting. And when we were thinking about building out our inside sales team in a centralized location, that was one of our factors, is what is the diversity makeup of the talent pool of the 5 locations that we were considering. And that's what led us to, to focusing in on Austin, which has been really successful. And we've hired over 50% women and a good representation of other URGs in Austin. So the strategy is working. And again, I think it's the intentionality of it. And I'm thankful that we're a little bit constrained on location, because we said you could hire anywhere in the world. It's a little daunting from a sourcing perspective. So it allows us to be a little bit more strategic in our hiring.
Jen, we've marveled at the success that HashiCorp has had, but across the rest of our portfolio, I know you're working hard to provide the resources that companies need to make this a thrust. What are you seeing as some of the best practices? You've said, like, you got to start bottoms up in this, to have success with the E&I. Can you talk a little bit about what that means, and maybe some of the successes you've seen out there, and resources that you recommend to companies that they avail themselves of to get moving on this?
Yeah, absolutely. So first, I would just say, I would echo what Kate said about having a conversation. So I think for this to be an integral part of how companies operate, it has to start with the leadership, and it has to be really important to those at the top, and to start the conversation. So that's first. We recently hosted a town hall around diversity, equity, and inclusion with many of our CEOs, and it was an incredible forum. Just the insights and the steps that people are taking are pretty inspirational. So to the point around starting bottoms up, we're working on a diversity from day one playbook, because as and Mike, you can certainly speak to this, when you're in the early stages of building, it's a firefight from day to day. So how do you also kind of make sure that diversity is part of something that you do, both in your hiring practices, and then inclusion is something that you also are really paying attention to. So we're putting together a tactical playbook around that. We have, and as a part of that, we include things, and honestly, we have search strings from and Boolean searches from LinkedIn, like ways to think about different underrepresented groups. How do you access and target those populations in innovative ways? So we have that. Working with another portfolio company, Handshake, that is a platform for university recruiting. They have access to an unbelievable number of schools that have the populations that we're targeting from a sourcing standpoint. So that's another great platform that I think we should all be leveraging. And then we have a whole kind of related but more specific. We have a whole resource list around anti-racism that we will be making public over the next week. So those are a few of the things. We're also internally going to be holding ourselves pretty accountable to certain metrics and numbers, make sure that we are practicing what we preach and doing strategic sourcing ourselves, and many other initiatives that we're working on right now. But that's a small sample, and I just think we all have a lot of work to do here, but really commend the work that Kate's doing at HashiCorp, because those numbers are incredible, and it's tough to do.
Thanks. That's it. I know there's a lot of work to be done on this front, but it's super important. One of the things I'm picking up here is that in some ways, because look, we're going to get to onboarding in a moment and talk about this specific topic as it relates to onboarding in a virtual world. But up funnel, just getting the funnel filled is a necessary step if you want to have a diverse workforce. And it seems like relaxing the geo constraint helps with that. Mike, what can you say about this topic? Looking across your customer base, you're obviously talking to lots of heads of talent and recruiters, folks running recruiting at your customers. Like, is this a topic that people are starting to care more about? And are they thinking about it from a source? Like, how are they thinking about trying to address it? Do they realize that there's some unconscious bias they need to try to figure out how to get out of the system, or is it more just a checkbox for people?
Well, I think one of the things is, like, generationally, I think our leadership is open-minded to making change and probably thought we were doing better than we've been doing. I really believe that. I think it's mostly good people trying to do good things, but haven't put the systems in place to ensure that they're doing great things. It's amazing to me that a lot of our customers that are talking about, gosh, the gender inequality issues have been so consuming and we still haven't gotten that right. Like, that's just like a massive thing that still needs to be fixed. And we've been talking about it for years, right? And then now they're frankly like, now I got to think about this too. And it's a big challenge that we now need to just be aware and sensitive to the magnitude of it, right? And put processes like what you guys are doing. That is awesome. Like the tactical playbook, day one, new co, right? Get census tracking at every board meeting, mean it, right? Tie KPIs to it, tie incentive, whatever it is, but you got to meet it and be intentional and follow through. I think tactically, to your point, the top of funnel challenge is so real, especially for Bay Area tech companies. Again, I know plenty of well-intentioned heads of TA that thought they were doing everything in their power, but they're still at 6.8%, right, across the tech, with African Americans in those types of roles. So that's a thing we got to deal with, right? Is just opening that pool and just try harder. The second piece of it I thought is super interesting is the next phase, and we recently rolled out an upper funnel product that tries to reduce unconscious bias just from going from sort of pre-screened first interview. And we've had companies that I would put in the bucket as extremely progressive on this issue that have already come back with data saying that we're driving a 32% increase in underrepresented groups getting through that first gate. And on one side, I'm super proud of that. On the other side, I'm like, WTF, this is a company that was trying really hard and they had a 32% opportunity, right? So I think we also have to acknowledge that there's still something in that next phase that we got to get right once we get the top of the funnel right. And then there's a last really subtle piece that we don't talk about enough as well, which is the retention. We've seen data coming from our customers that with underrepresented groups are sort of the highest attriting groups of their entire company populations. Multiple explanations for that. I think we all have to do a better job on a bunch of fronts. But one of the things is, especially in the Bay Area, it's highly competitive for the great talent from underrepresented groups. So you just got to like acknowledge that as part of your calculus on how to attack, right, the problem, right? So it is complex. I think we need to attack it in all three phases and put data behind it and have guys like you and boards and like just drive at it and not take the foot off the gas.
So in addition now to to a candidate brand that you have to build, you also have to build, it sounds like, employee brand is really important, like an employee experience. Your job isn't done once you bring somebody over the line and hire them, because if they attrit, that if they attrit before they're, before they should, that's not good for anybody. And I imagine in a virtual environment, the risk is even higher because you don't have the human, sort of the some of the human element can get lost. Anything you're seeing across the customer base, or things that people are trying to do to address this issue of higher than wanted attrition, and anything you can say about where you think this heads over time?
Well, I think there are, and just in my own, I love what Kate said about just talking about this stuff and just talking to my executive colleagues and whatnot, that African American friends and what have you around that piece, the feedback on, you know, the upward mobility in organizations for folks from underrepresented groups to something, again, I don't have great hard data on it, but the anecdotal feedback is it's a real thing. So we have to do a better job of nurturing, right, those individuals through their career to ensure that they are in the leadership positions, they are on our board, you know, the whole thing, right? So that piece, I think, is a blind spot. The part around how competitive it is, it's the gunfight. I mean, that's like it is for any talent. So, so I don't know. I don't have any words of wisdom on that, but other than, I think if you do the first part, the second part, at least you'll have greater odds from a retention perspective. But we got to acknowledge the first part, and we got to be intentional and get it right. We have to do it as a talent community, frankly, in my perspective.
Jen, if looking across the GGV portfolio, I mean, I know you've been talking about onboarding and the importance of onboarding for a long time. In a virtual world, whether for underrepresented candidate groups or fully represented candidate groups, what does onboarding become even more important? And what are you seeing from our portfolio? What are, companies that are doing it well, what are they doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So just a quick stat related to onboarding. The Gallup organization still has great data around the human experience in the workplace. And a few years ago, they published a statistic that 69% of employees are likely to stay over 3 years at a company if they have a good onboarding experience. So unbelievably important. And I would argue even more so in our current virtual environment. What you lose in this environment is the kind of organic interface between people in the hallway and the parking lot, running to go get a coffee and get to know each other. So figuring out how to virtually replicate that is something that I think companies, it's easy to lose sight of it because we schedule meetings on Zoom, but how do you think about the natural interactions that happen in a workplace in person, and how do you replicate that in Zoom? So don't let that get lost, but also pay a lot of attention to onboarding. Companies that do it well, I think Workboard does it exceptionally well. They really pay attention to making that human connection and having even the language that companies use when when new employees join, there's a mental shift, and it's a we're an us, like, you're now, how do you make people feel a part of the team when you're not sitting around an office or sitting around a table at a meeting together? So all of that, I think, Kate and Mike, you've both, I'm sure, seen things where there are different things on Slack that you can do to help facilitate introductions with people that don't necessarily work in the same functional group. So there are different kind of technology solutions out there to help facilitate it, but critically important, absolutely. Even more so now, yes. And incorporating or trying to at least simulate or pay attention to some of the interactions, the human interactions that are harder to do in a virtual world, I think are all pretty important. And I also think it is part of the retention to the earlier stat, and especially for underrepresented groups, thinking about what that experience is from day one is critically important.
Kate, despite the fact that HashiCorp is remote, up until the pandemic, you guys have always had these kind of special onboarding sessions, which were in person, at HQ in San Francisco. I think, Mitchell or Armand and Dave, like people would get to meet the founders and CEO and also get to meet each other and feel like they were part of a group in that way. Obviously, you can't do that now. So how are you onboarding differently the groups that you're hiring in post-pandemic world?
Yeah, so I have to give MG a huge shout out, who runs our talent development, and she owns all of the onboarding. And there's a couple of pieces that we've adjusted the plan for this year. So onboarding, as you said, we were lucky enough to be able to fly everybody to San Francisco when they started. So we'd have people from Australia and Singapore and France. So it was a really fun global group. And obviously can't do that anymore. And so she, I mean, literally within a week, shifted the entire onboarding program to be completely virtual, which was no small feat. And we call it our Bridge Connection Days is the name of our onboarding program. And so she took that virtual with the three kind of components that make that up. One is, with Dave and Armand and Mitchell and Preeti, our head of engineering, those are all still live sessions, obviously over Zoom. But then we've been able to, and MG is super creative and fun. So she's recorded the other leaders to give their overview of their organization. And so now our employees go through that kind of on their own time, and it's nice because they can actually go back to it and say, oh wait, what was that one thing that Ash said about CS that I can't remember? So they have access to that to be able to go back to it, which is great. Because your first week, you're like, I don't even know what this means, right? You don't have the context. So that's been really, really helpful. And then the third thing is we call them virtual Hashi cafes. So we have at all of our events, our signature thing is we always have baristas, and there's like 50 baristas across our events. And so we've taken that virtual and started with our onboarding class where we have facilitators. So there's, a set kind of agenda to get people together and have a cup of coffee. And Glenn, when we were talking earlier, it was like, you should actually pay for their coffee. I was like, yeah, good call. I'll let MG know.
Don't tell Dave I said that.
Yeah, exactly.
Or Navam.
It's gonna come out of your pocket. No.
Yeah, eventually.
So we've been doing those and actually expanding those to our employee population. They've been really fun, and it's a good way for a group of people to connect outside of, like, Jen, I think you're referencing like donut chats and Slack and ways to connect people. So that's been really, really helpful. A couple other things. So we've expedited some of our manager training. And so when you talk about retention, this year is all about the manager. So how do we enable our managers and make sure that they're equipped to lead, not just in a virtual world, but just in general, and give them those tools. And then we're also developing some content around how HashiCorp works for our internal employees. So guidance around, all of the different tools that we have and how you use them. So I think those things will help with the onboarding and help with the long-term retention.
Awesome. All right, we're just about out of time, but I'm going to ask you one hot seat question. Everyone has to answer. Give us a favorite book or podcast or something that you read or listen to that that's on this topic broadly of talent and talent management that you recommend to others. Mike.
Any book about
Okay, Shackleton.
Follow his lead on team building.
I read the Shackleton book. That it was unbelievable. Okay, Jen.
I like Who by Jeffrey Smart, all about assessment.
Okay, Kate.
I'm gonna take it old school. How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Dale Carnegie. Love it. Love it.
No, I love
Hey guys, speaking of winning friends and influencing people, you guys have been amazing. This has been a great conversation. Really, really appreciate you sharing your thoughts. I'm sure everyone listening does as well. Thanks again for your time, and thanks to everybody for listening.